sorry, we got no use of stuff already. Thank you. We now go on to the next agenda item, which is minutes of the meeting that were held on the 6th of April, 2018. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of April are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Do you agree? Thank you. By all means.
Thanks, Chair. On page 7, I concerned at last meeting regarding the what we call Blue Bridge between Leicester and Wixton on Elston Lane. I have received the report about that now, so thank you.
Just to, like, normally that will not be written down because we talked about it in the briefing, but it is saying he got the report, and I think it's a compliment being made that we followed something through and action has been taken. Is that correct? We now go on to question time. I have received no questions. Number 5, questions asked by members under Standing Order and 7.3 and 7.5. We received a question from Mr. Hunt under Standing Order 7.3, 7.5. So everybody should have a copy, but I don't think they did. Have you all received a copy? Now, you've got it. Good, thank you. Just making sure. Okay. You can ask up to the 3 supplementary questions, as there are these elements of your original question, but I remind you that your supplementary questions should clarify the reply you have given and should not raise new issues. So following any supplementary questions, Mr. Hunt,
Yes, thank you, Chair.
That's okay, Mr.
Everybody's seen the questions. They arise from a particular case in my division, but they apply to these sorts of requests for residence parking zones throughout the county. And I appreciate the detailed answer from the officers under C, which reflects my experience that officers are highly professional in a somewhat straitjacketed sense. I call them the new model army of Puritans under these financial restrictions. My question is this: if he can't, if the answer can't tell us whether residence parking zones or amendments can or cannot be accepted, can he tell me how many the authority has created or amended in the last 12, 24 months?
Can I just... that's a good question. Can you answer that, Ian, by any chance?
Yes, I can, Chair, but not today, unfortunately, as that is a new question. I can get the information back to the members. The one thing I would say is, yes, it is unfortunate we do work in a final constraint that could be seen as a straitjacket, but the one thing we don't do is we don't have an immediate no to every question we get asked. We always look down the criteria, which we've explained to members many times, of any request we receive, whether it's a minor amendment for a parking restriction or a junction is unsafe. We always follow the same criteria of looking at which schemes we should prioritise first based on accident problems caused and congestion caused. If the answer then comes out as no, it's not something we're going to fund because of our limited resources, but it's something we would have done, then we always give the option back for third-party funding to take that forward. I will give you the information on the number of residence parking schemes we've amended since they've come into force, actually, over the last 10 years, just to put in context. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That'll give you the information I need to hand to residents. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. That's again, just from the briefing, you know, it is prioritised. We do prioritise. Safety is the main thing, etc. And we are going through financially difficult times. We're all aware of that. But you know, I do understand that every case is taking it on its individual response, situation, and we appreciate that. But it was a well worth question, Max. Thank you very much. Next is to any other items. To the chairman. So I've received, and I've got no urgent items been received. So there's nothing happened in the last 2 seconds. No, right then. So now we go declarations of interest, respect to items of the agenda. Any declarations of interest? And
Many thanks, Chairman. I'll declare an interest in item 10, draft passenger transport policy and strategy. It's a non-pecuniary personal interest which has been stated at cabinet meetings before.
Thank you for that. Declarations of the party whip in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. Are there any declarations of party whip? No. So now we go on to presentations of petitions. Under Standing Order 36, we have a presentation of a petition today, and it's under 36 to be presented to the committee. This relates to the road safety around Moira Primary School and will be presented by Laura Smith. Laura, how are you? A governor of Moira Primary School, and I think a number of members around this table have been governors or are governors as well, so we understand the role. And also, Mr. Sheenan, the local member, would also like to say a few words. So, Laura, would you like to present the items of your petition? The committee will speak for no more than 3 minutes, and then we'll invite Mr. Sheenan to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be able to present this petition to you on behalf of Moira. So I know you can see it on your notes as well as I can. Our petition is this. We petition the Council in conjunction with other relevant agencies to urgently address our concerns about road safety at Moira School. The school has grown in size from an infant to a primary school in recent years, and the school run has therefore become much, much busier. There are repeated occurrences of inconsiderate driver behaviour and potentially illegal parking, which the school has documented and drivers have been spoken to. In the worst example, a car was written off outside the school due to double parking, and we believe that action needs to be taken before there is a serious accident involving a child. The risks are compounded by restricted visibility at school entrance looking towards Blackfordby and the close proximity of a speed limit of 60 miles an hour for vehicles entering the school's 20 mile an hour zone. The school and local community are working together to reduce the likelihood of an accident or injury to our pupils, parents or residents. As a matter of urgency, we feel that the Council should carefully analyse and audit the current risks and consider making the appropriate adjustments to minimise these. And we managed to get 529 signatures on that to bring that to you today. So if I may, the petition says much of it. The key concerns for us as a school are the fact that we have one main road in front of the school, which is very close to 60 mile an hour zone, and means that vehicles can travel at very high speed through and past Moira Primary School, and also that the majority of our children access the school through one housing estate at the back of the school, where there are currently no restrictions in place for parking. A number of residents have multiple cars that are often parked legally, and there are many, many more cars coming to the school as a result of the school continuing to grow in size. This means that we get double parking, cars parked on corners, sometimes parked legally but still leaving very, very little space for other cars to pass, and obstructing visibility. Key issues with that is buses haven't been able to pass through. A car's been written off because of that. Emergency vehicles in some cases would not get through, and also it is obviously a danger to our children, many of whom walk home alone or use scooters, that there are cars travelling at high speed and a lot of congestion in the area. One of the key things we wanted to mention is how much the school has already done themselves to try to alleviate this issue. The school's been working very hard over the last year with residents, with the local community to try to do this. They've done things such as having the PCSO out with governors, with the head teacher, to speak to people parking, to ask them to park more considerately or differently. The school has purchased itself signs, banners, the polite notices to spread around the school vicinity. Again, to try and spread the message of parking considerately and carefully. They've sent letters out to residents, to parents. It's been a monthly item on the school newsletter. The children have got involved. They've written letters explaining their concerns about child safety and road safety around the school, which have been delivered. The school requested a lollipop lady. That wasn't possible. They've attended council meetings, committee meetings to raise these issues. The school has wraparound care already to try to reduce the number of children arriving at the school or leaving at any one point. And also volunteers have been appealed for walking bus schemes, for ride and stride schemes, but haven't been forthcoming. So the school very much feels that they've done everything they can and will continue to do everything they can to address the concerns in the petition, but feel that something more formal is needed because the informal methods that the school are able to use aren't currently easing the problem.
Thank you, and I think that was a wonderful presentation, very clear and precise, and I really appreciate that. And thank you very much. I'd like to go on to Councillor Sheenan. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I can confirm everything that Laura said, and I think the effort the school has been making to try and address this problem is to be commended. And I think now the school is reaching out to the county to work in partnership to try and get a little bit more done. One thing that strikes me as you leave the school at the entrance is that you've got quite a sharp bend not too far down the road. Just beyond that is a 60-mile-an-hour zone. That's the approach to the village from Blackfordby, and I think that should be looked at as a first priority to see if we can reduce the 60 to 50 or 40. We've certainly done that elsewhere. In Measham at both ends, from Birds Hill and coming down from Ashby Road, it's been reduced to 50. On the approach to Ashby and on the approach to Packington, it's already been reduced as well, from 60 to 50. So there's regulations that say that we can do that, and I think it can be done relatively inexpensively. I think if the officers came out and site had a look at it, they'll probably agree it's a good idea. It's just a question of getting the police to agree, which we know sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. There was a very good report came to committee about parking outside schools not that long ago, and I think we ought to look at extending the parking restrictions in the immediate vicinity of the school and see if we can do anything there. That's where a lot of the problems occur. And I think also in terms of the parking problems in the back roads around the estates, we need to work together with the district councils, with the police if appropriate, and the school, who are obviously doing their bit, to see what we can do to minimise the risk and discourage the inconsiderate, potentially illegal parking which is going on. So that's all I really need to say, Chairman. I look forward to a report coming back to the next meeting, hopefully, and certainly welcome the opportunity to meet on site with officers to look at the situation as they see it.
Thank you, Councillor Sheenan. Would like some comments. Ian, please.
Yes, thank you very much for presenting your petition. Obviously, with 400 schools in Leicestershire, it's an unfortunate problem that is repeated by those few drivers that plague areas outside school. And as Councillor Sheenan said, we brought a report back around the problems of parking outside schools recently to all members, where we explained, unfortunately, the difficulties and the exemptions that are allowed for drivers with children in their cars to drop off and pick up. Notwithstanding that, and as per Councillor Hunt's question, we do take every request we receive in the same seriousness, be it a petition signed by over 500 people or one person raising it. We will do the full investigation, as we always do. I think officers are always particularly motivated as well, even they should be on everything, but they are when children's safety involved. We will look at the current speed limits, the accident records, what's in the locality. We will do a full unbiased look at that and present that back in the reports. I know Councillor Blake would like to raise a few things that we're currently doing in the area and are doing elsewhere, so I'll leave the rest to him. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go over now to Councillor Payne, who is the lead on the Cabinet on transport. Okay, thank you.
Many thanks, Chairman, and thank you to the Assistant Director for his response there, and thank you, Laura, for bringing the petition forward. It's not an uncommon problem, which is why we recently, as Sean's just pointed out, brought a report forward saying that we'd like to do more, because there is, at the very least, a perception of dangerous parking and perception of safety concerns outside of the schools in Leicestershire. So we've done a survey to date of all of those schools. That's all being brought together, and by the autumn we should have a fully implemented scheme which will involve putting mandatory zigzag lines outside those schools that want them and those schools that we feel need them. At the moment, many of the zigzag lines are not mandatory, and therefore when you refer to potentially illegal parking, I suspect that the legality of the current parking is probably legal, because the traffic regulation order that governs the legality of that position doesn't currently exist. So we're looking to change that, and hopefully by the end of the autumn we'll have a programme that will deal with that issue. We're also investing, as you know, Chairman, in an enforcement car that will rove around the county and to offer a deterrent and obviously deal with any penalties that need to be implemented in accordance with the regulatory orders that we intend to pass through. So, as the Assistant Director said, we'll look at this specific petition and the specific concerns on its own merits, and a response will come back to the scrutiny panel in due course. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Once again, I'd like to thank Laura. Wonderful presentation, and Councillor Sheehan for the support. It's good to see you working together, and hopefully we'll move forward and solve the problems the best we can. Thank you. We now go on to the agenda item number 10. And this is a draft passenger transport policy and strategy. It's on pages 9 to 102. I've sort of seen it presented recently at the district. We had over 80 people. It was very well presented, I must say. I was very impressed with the officers and how they managed the questions, and it was quite thorough. I will now ask Ian. Ian Veers, our assistant. I think Anne's away. Is she on holiday somewhere? Yeah, enjoying herself. Hope she's not gone back to Scotland. I mean, you don't want to go back home, do you? She's gone back home, actually. Well, I couldn't wait to get away from home, but there you go. I'd like to, Director Environment and Transport, could you present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't intending to read the whole report or do the whole presentation that I've done a number of times around the county now as part of the consultation events.
Well, you did say in briefing that you're dreaming, and you know you don't even have to have it written down because you know verbatim. Is that true?
It does help me get to sleep, yes. I will just go through some of the highlights. We've already brought, before this came to Cabinet, for the approval to consult the report, and it's what we're really asking for today is members of this committee's opinions to feed into the consultation report that we'll be writing once consultation closes. But there are a few major points I just wanted to make. First of all, we've been quite clear to stress our statutory role that we currently have in providing transport. Our statutory role, as defined, is we must consider appropriate and secure to meet public transport requirements. It says we must only consider them. It says we should try and meet those within the available resources. At no point in our statutory duty does it say we must provide a bus. And unfortunately, when we go out to talk to many people, what we've heard a lot of the times is, you must put a bus on, you must put a bus. What we really want our new policy and strategy to focus on within the limited resources we have is meeting essential transport needs. So the new policy and strategy we're consulting on is really trying to make very clear what we want people to tell us what they think those essential needs should be. We've been travelling around giving people some facts and figures. For example, what most people don't realise is that 94% of the transport needs are met in Leicestershire already by commercial transport. That's your Stagecoach, your Centre Bus, your Arrivas. And of those 13 million journeys, it's only that 800,000 journeys that are actually met or supported by Leicestershire County Council or the other voluntary sectors. We currently spend around £2.4 million supporting passenger transport in Leicestershire. That not only involves supporting bus networks, but also for advertising, for information provision, and helping with ticketing and so forth. There is a very small snapshot of the data we collected prior to, as part of the work for the drafting the policy and strategy. We surveyed all of the users that were on for a week or so on all of the bus networks we support at the back end of last year to help us determine who are the people who are currently using it, what are they using it for, how are they using it, and when are they using it, to try and define when are those essential needs should and could be met. Some interesting facts that came out was the number of elderly people who actually use the services, which would then indicate to you that your policy needs to concentrate, if so minded, on that area. The types of journeys, over 40% of the journeys were being used for shopping, and nearly 50% of the people were actually retired, although may not consider themselves elderly. The reason why we need to change, as members will probably be aware, and it's usually every month that it happens, the commercial services are changing quite a lot at the moment. We receive new registrations or decreases in the services being provided on a monthly basis, and we have to respond to those by meeting those essential needs as best we can. That's putting quite a strain on the current resources we have. However, we do know some of the services we do provide at the moment are not good value for money. And we do think we can save approximately £400,000 by just providing for those needs in different ways. It not just being a bus that runs on an hourly or 2 hourly basis. So we are having pressure on the budget, and we do need to make sure, as we should always with all the services we provide, they are the most value for money we can make them. Very briefly, the approach is not about stopping all passenger transport support. Really wanted to make that very clear. It's about providing very fit-for-purpose solutions. Those can be done in a number of different ways. Very briefly, I will just concentrate on also what it's not about to make sure there's no confusion. It's not about the current park and ride services, because that's not about the criteria we've got here under the statutory duty. It's certainly not about home to school transport services. They have their whole raft of own statutory duties under which we have to provide. It's not about rail travel. We currently don't support any of those. It's not about commercial taxis or private hire services. We have been asked questions about those. That's not something that's part of this. And it's not about specialist transport services for education and social care. And as members may recall, we've had some difficult conversations about those in here and with the people of Leicestershire. Those have their own duties as well. So our draft policy sets out how we would try and meet the needs of the people of Leicestershire for those essential journeys. And essentially, the best way we can do that is, first of all, by supporting the commercial bus networks that are already out there. They're already providing for 94%, but they are struggling. Then helping them by minimising congestion, providing the right infrastructure to enable those to work as efficiently as effectively as possible so they keep running, is probably the most effective way we can meet people's transport needs. If it's not being met commercially, we would then look to the communities. Excuse me. We would then look to the communities to see what community-based solutions could be provided. The communities around Leicestershire provide many, many different solutions at the moment, be it from community transport to car clubs to running their own minibuses around their villages and towns. Each community will probably have a very different solution they might like to put in place, so we would not be prescriptive in what they may wish to explore. And finally, if there was no community solution coming forward, then under our statutory duty, the County Council would always look to be that provider of last resort. That could often be done either as a demand responsive transport type solution, or as we have with a number of routes, it could still be a bus provision, but that would only be where it was value for money, where we were transporting lots of people at a good price to the same places at the same time. One of the things we will have to probably do to make our services more efficient is take some of the choice out of what people have at the moment. And we've often heard through the consultation exercises, I'd like to have an hourly bus service so I can have a choice when I go. Unfortunately, that choice costs us quite a lot of money, because if no one's using it, we pay for empty air to be moved around the county on buses. So we'll be looking to meet essential need. So what the policy then starts to try and do is look at what those essential needs could be, so the priority groups, and looking at already who's relying on this transport. It's the elderly, the disabled, or those isolated communities who don't have access to other transport. What types of journey those could be: food shopping, primary health care, employment or training to a local centre, and when we should be providing, between the hours of 7 and 7 on Monday to Friday, and Saturday 8 until 6. What we wouldn't do at the moment, we just have a phrase in the current policy that says we will try and do that for value for money. One of the problems we have whenever we come across a service being taken away commercially is everyone would like to see a bus to replace it, and we have no way of comparing one type of service to another across Leicestershire. It would be wrong, we feel, to just compare the cost per passenger, because if you live in an isolated area, say for example in the top of Melton, your travel distance and your cost to your local centre will be far greater than if you live just on the outskirts of Leicester. So we feel it should be, and that's what's been proposed in the consultation, it should be based on the cost per passenger per kilometre, to even that. We should also look at the number of residents who already have a bus service in their catchment area. Why should we be providing when they already have a service? And it should also look at those journey purposes we said, to make sure the most essential are being met. As you can understand, the statutory duty in no way says we should meet all journeys that are required by Leicestershire residents. Otherwise, we would have to pay for everyone's trip wherever they wanted to go. So essentially what will be happening next is the consultation will be finishing shortly. We've already had many hundreds of replies. We will be looking at those consultation responses, including what comes from Scrutiny today. And that will be compiled then, looked at the policy, see what changes we may wish to recommend. That will be brought back here to Scrutiny in October for members' comments before going to Cabinet for approval or not in October. What would happen then if the strategy and policy is approved? All of the current services we support have had their contracts extended to June 2019. The reason to do this was to give surety to the local communities that we then wanted to have the time to work with them to say if anything was going to change. We would then have that time to look at the community solutions that may be brought in before moving to a different solution of last resort. That would then happen throughout the autumn and the spring before any changes are brought in. And then we would look to see any changes brought in. The final thing I would say is one of the things we did as part of this consultation is we have been running 5 pilot projects for demand responsive transport, because if you've never used that, one of the things people say is they're nervous about losing their current provision. So we have laid those on in certain areas on some of the routes that are showing not value for money, so people could try what they would be like. That's the current consultation, Chair, as you heard the other night, and we would welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you, Ian. That was excellent. I did attend the meeting in Melton, and we had over 80 people, which was quite a great attendance. I'll just share some observations before we get questions. Is that it's quite an emotive, so I understand that, situation transport, you know, public transport, etc. What I did discover, though, there is a lack of knowledge, rightly so in some ways, that there's confusion between what we offer and commercial. And in fact, in one situation outside of Melton, we have a bus service every 20 minutes through a village, but it's, and they were saying that's crazy. Why every 20 minutes? We don't need it, but it's commercial. So if those commercial companies decide that's what they want to do, we cannot have any influence on that. That's their decision. I'm sure you're all aware of that. But there is that lack of awareness, I think, with the public, the difference between what we offer and the commercial bus service. There is also a lack of awareness or knowledge of DRT, and I think excellent that we're putting on trials for people to try. And I'm sure there's a bit of resistance because we were all a bit frightened of change, if we're honest about it. We get uncomfortable. And one of the examples, we did a consultancy on transport 4 years ago when I first arrived as a county councillor. And one of the villages, we said, look, we do some community support funds to continue that service, use it or lose it. Less people are using that service. So we've got to really look at the whole picture, and I totally support that. Where we need to do it, we do it. Where there's various ways of doing it, we do it. Let's try and get the best with what we've got. But I know it's emotive. It's a difficult situation we find our in because of finance. But it's crazy, and we must all agree, having a bus running all day for one person. That can't be right with taxpayers' money, can it? That's what I feel anyway. Anyway, over to the rest of the members for any questions. Thank you. I think I saw Max first.
I beg your pardon. So the first point I'd like to make refers to paragraph 43 on page 17, who are using paper copies. Prioritising the older population needs, I think, a bit more clarification. I mean, we're all in favour of prioritising older people, but also younger people too. And I think you've drawn in the otherwise excellent paper, I have to say, the importance of people who are in employment or training for the first time and without the transport they otherwise might have in later life. And also disabled people with disabilities and those with mobility needs. I just really wanted to emphasise that where we're talking about older people, we're talking about mobility, we're talking about social needs, which is very important, and we're talking about about being independent, and that also applies to other groups in society. The second point I wanted to make was perhaps more constructive about demand responsive transport. I think many people are unfamiliar with the opportunities that DRT offers, and I think before we replace our services with DRT, there's a bit of an information operation needed to ensure that people fully understand what they're getting. Now, one of those ways that's been suggested to me, only this afternoon actually, is to look at the Arriva click system. Now, I'm not a fan nor a promoter of Arriva, although they offer some good bus services through the county. But they do know how to run a bus service, and they are operating DRT in other areas. So that is one way of perhaps outsourcing the problem if we can't do it ourselves, because it's always best to do it ourselves if we can. There are 2 points, Chair. Thanks very much.
Can I just add, though, at the briefing you did add another point which I'd like to bring in. Could we in future use people with disability instead of disabled? That's a term. I think it'd be lovely that we use. It's more, it's definitely a nicer word than disabled. So people with disability. I'd like to think that's just a comment. You did make it, and I think that was a genuine comment there. Over to you, Ian.
On that one, as a person with a disability, I have no problem either way, so that's fine. I'll speak first of all about Arriva Click. One thing we have done as part of preparing for this consultation and the rollout of anything that may come from the agreement of any policy and strategy is we have looked far and wide across the country for all of the different types of solutions being done elsewhere. I'm a firm believer if someone else has done it right first, then nick the idea and claim it as your own, because that's probably the most efficient thing to do. Arriva Click is currently being tried at a town down south. For those who are familiar with Uber, it runs similar to that sort of setup, whereby the Arriva have a number of minibuses operating around a town. You currently can go online, negotiate your cost and journey time. They will come to you within 20 minutes, and you have that journey with a fixed price currently. So it's a bit like a demand responsive transport for towns. The problem Arriva have at the moment is, and they are offering this service a number of places around the country, is they want an awful lot of money to come and set it up in your area. I do think IT solutions will be one of the things that comes forward over the next few years, because there is an awful lot of transport that goes along around our county and elsewhere, whereby if you can broker in a quick, efficient and easy way those seats and those transport, you could probably meet most of your transport needs. Arriva Click in the commercial market, if it can do it cheap and efficiently and value for money, we will of course look at it. I think on the final point, we have done an awful lot of work around the different categories of age profiles of people using the services. One of the decisions that we will have to make is which ones are we going to concentrate on meeting those needs, and if we're only putting on demand responsive transport, it's the best way those can be done. Interestingly enough, one of the comments that came from from the consultation was most people think community transport is only available to the elderly. It's not. It's available to everyone, but it's how it's publicised and how it's put on. So I think how transport is communicated in the future will be a major step going forward, as well as we change things. Because as you said, everyone likes change and it makes us all very nervous.
Definitely. Just the other issue again, and I think it was a good point Max made today and at the briefing, is that the other issue is, of course, people are living longer, but are they living longer healthier? And that puts strain on services if they're living longer and we have to provide additional service. You're aware of some of the stats and figures. So it is a difficult balancing act that we've got in the future. And I know we're looking at it, but I appreciate that. Thank you, Max. Can we go on to, would you like to add something?
A minor point here. The officer mentioned community transport. Now, that has got a role, but if you talk to community transport providers, they're very much focused on what they do, and I think it would be presumptuous, a little bit unfair to say that they can do it, because that's a negotiation that has to be made with each one of them.
Yeah, fair point, Max. Thank you. Councillor Bill, your turn, I think, and then we'll move on down the town. I'm doing it though, it's easier. Okay.
Yes, this is a somewhat challenging and rather depressing report, in my mind. We used to talk about integrated transport policies, where you could go everywhere by public transport, train, bus, taxi, and we could all leave our cars at home. But that now seems to have fallen by the wayside to some extent. Could I just put in a plug for the Hinckley services? It's an ever-changing network of ever-changing matrix of services, but I've been keeping an eye on them, and I think that the buses that I see always seem to have people in them. I don't think we're moving empty air around in that area, so I hope that at the end of this exercise we will still have that network going out from Hinckley to the villages in all directions. So that's I very much hope that remains. Could I just ask a general question, and that is, have we given thought to what's going to happen in the long term? We're being asked to look at the growth in, thinking particularly of South Leicestershire, the growth of 180,000 properties, and one of the issues that has arisen out of that is the Jacobs report, which says that even with that proposed expressway, whether or not it's built, there is going to be severe congestion from these communities in and out of the city. In fact, we're not going to be able to move at all, those people who are here at that time. So if we're now thinking in terms of cutting back on public transport, and in this case buses, that is simply going to exacerbate the situation, because it's logical that if you can get 50 people into a bus, or 40 people or 20 people, then you're going to reduce congestion. But if we're now going to start withdrawing buses because the subsidy is too much, then we're simply going to add to congestion, which we'll come to at the end of today's hearing, where we're being told that congestion is on the increase. So I think we ought to look at while we're looking at the provision of buses, we really ought to look at the long-term impact of the potential loss of services. Chairman.
Thank you for that. And that's visionary, and I do agree a lot of your comments. It's just and I will go on to Councillor Payne in a second, but we all have these problems wherever we live. In Melton, most households have got 3 cars, some 4. Yeah, you're quite right. It is a difficult balancing act, and I do believe we're trying to address it the best way we can. And I know we're looking at all the issues, the figures, but it's not easy. But let me hand over to Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to respond to 2 points that have been made. Perhaps give Ian a little bit of rest. If you haven't noticed, he's rather ill. He has been for most of the week, and he's doing a brilliant job for us. Just on the first point that Max made, or the last point Max made about community transport operators, whilst I think it's a valid point and one that should be recognised within the consultation process, I have to say I've been contacted personally by community transport operators who see this as an opportunity for them, because they feel they're being squeezed out by the commercial operators, and they're being squeezed out by where we put our current subsidies. And they're very keen to see some form of policy that actually brings them into play, and if there's a possibility of getting some more resource for them to be able to develop their own community services, they see that as a positive thing. So again, all those comments will be factored in to the consultation process. And on Mr. Bill's wider point, which is to do with the strategic growth plan, I think what we've got to accept here, that the council needs to make decisions in the short to medium term. We set medium-term financial strategies, we have all sorts of medium-term plans, because they're the immediate challenges we face. The world was very different, Leicestershire was very different 20 years ago to what it is today. And when the strategic growth plan, if this strategic growth plan comes to fruition, the world will look very different in 20 years' time, and we can't really start formulating detailed plans to mitigate and accommodate the the vision in 20 years' time right now. This is about the here and now. What I will say, to give Mr. Bilson comfort, whilst we can't predict what will happen in the future, especially that far away, although we can give it our best shot at trying to assess what it may look like, the strategic growth plan would be accompanied by the strategic transport plan, which is a very large piece of work that will need to be done. But until we know where we are with the strategic growth plan, it's very difficult for us to start working on that strategic transport plan. So this is about the here and now, and we'll deal with the strategic growth plan when we need to, in terms of the detail that will need to accommodate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Can I now go on to Mr. Bolter? Councillor Bolter, thank you. Sorry.
Once again, a slightly alternative viewpoint. I still believe there should be a bus service stream on major routes. The RT's got its place, I don't dispute that. But between major routes, major centres, there should be a bus service. I'm not saying how frequent it should be, that's up to officers to sort out. But if you look at the subsidy that each one is cost per journey, there's quite a big range of costs on the bus journey, from £7 down to just a few pence on the subsidised routes. So I still believe that that is important, especially, as Mr. Bill says, with extra development taking place on most of the towns in Leicestershire. We've got big areas being built on, not in the long term, but in the short term. Mr. Payne, in your division alone, there's houses being built within the next 5 years. So we need to look at that. So DRT's got its place, but if you're elderly or need a doctor's appointment, DRT you've got to ring the day before. You might not know you need the day before you need to have the bus, so you can't do that. But I think some skeleton of a bus service on major routes should be in place all the while. And I thought those are cabinets to look at a possibility of a skeleton service on major routes at certain times of the day. Not on a regular basis, but certain times of the day. Also, we need to be assured that the priority groups are being looked after. You've got here older population, yes. People with disabilities, yes. Isolation, yes. But it's not just about that. It's also about the quality where people live. All the extra house building we've got going off will increase the air quality, will reduce the air quality in most of these areas. So we need to encourage people to use public transport, so not using cars. So on one hand, the county's talking about cutting air quality, improving air quality. On the other hand, cutting bus service. Well, two somewhere have got to equalise. You know, we can't keep putting cars onto the roads, having poor air quality. Remove public transport so people haven't got the ability to use a bus. So that needs to be looked at as well. So I would urge the Cabinet to think very carefully about a skeleton bus service on major routes. If it's only 4 times a day, at least it's something people could hang on. I don't think that's been done before. Also, park and ride's not included in this report. It's done elsewhere. And it just costs us quite a lot, the park and ride. At the minute, if we're comparing passenger journeys, which we are, Maynooth Gorse is 45 pence per person, Enderby is 15 pence per person, and Birstall is £1.11 per person. That does equate quite nicely with some of the bus services that we are subsidising on these routes. So I really think we ought to look at the whole service, not part of it. And also it doesn't include the hospital hopper that goes round, which is not included in this. So it's only parts of the service we're looking at, not the whole service. But I'll let Mr. Fears answer those questions.
Thank you, Councillor Boulder. Some good questions there. Just quickly, just from experience living in rural, that normally you have appointments. If it's an appointment, you do know ahead. All I can say is, if it's an emergency, the last thing I would catch is a bus. It's a taxi or get somebody to drive me there. I think I think there's a difference between emergency and appointments. I think I'm correct in that, but and that's actually happened to me where I've had appointments with my wife, as you know, who was ill, and there was an emergency time, and it was okay, we're off straight away, taxi or the car. So sometimes emergencies are different. Over to Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Number of points covered there that were in the consultation. I didn't touch on them for brevity's sake. We do work through the planning process trying to secure as much public transport provision as possible, however the form that may take as part of the developers mitigating the impact of their development, which we do. That often comes in with the Section 106 that can run for up to 5 years, either adding on to existing services or provision in a different way. So that is a large part of what we do to mitigate anyway in the now, and it will always be for the future as well. But we do have to work within the current planning rules, and that can always be a challenge, as I'm sure most members will know. Regarding the air quality, once again, we're not about not laying on transport for people. We're about trying to do it in the most efficient way. And I'm sure if some of the members were here from Melton who know some of the buses that are being run out there, what you tend to find on some of our supported network is they are the older type fleets, which are the most polluting. They're not the in-town clean air Cat 5 type vehicles that we want to encourage bus operators to use. If you have a very large vehicle that's only carrying a few people around, the DRT or other transport provision can be run in many different ways. It can be a book your journey the night before, or it can be a minibus or taxi that runs on a regular schedule that you know is going to happen on those days. So, for example, we have one that runs, I think, into Narborough from one of the villages outlying, which does the doctor's run. That runs on a certain day on a certain time because that's when the appointments for the certain people are. And when those appointments were changed, the patients rang up and said, do you mind if we change it? We went, no, switch it to the day because the nurse changed their days. It can be very, very flexible. What we actually want to do is use the money we have to transport people in the most efficient way. And actually, we might even see some environmental benefits because if we're not having empty, polluting buses running around, which are the older type, if we have more efficient fleet, smaller vehicles, that could be, or even electric vehicles being run in villages, that could be far better. As I say, the future in transport is changing very rapidly. What we're trying to do is, with the monies that we have, and we are limited, we will only use that to the most essential needs in the most efficient way. I think finally, just to remember, 94% of the transport in Leicestershire is already met commercially. So if you looked at a map of Leicestershire, and I can send you one, depends on your definition of a major route in a major town. All of the major routes and all the major towns are served as already. It's about those little connections to those routes. And there was a very good example of someone raised in Lutterworth when we were doing the consultation there, where Lutterworth Town Council were already starting to think, okay, we don't have a really regular service here, but Broughton Astley does. How can we lay on a electric type vehicle, a minibus, to connect people from Lutterworth to that Leicester service that goes every 20 minutes so that we can just shuckle backwards and forwards. It's about those different thinking ideas. But I do think all the major towns and major routes are already served and always will be.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
I know under the planning rules, 106 monies, the county asks for a bus passes for a number of years for people moving in. If it was working, that'd be fine. But as they've given back £800,000 to bus companies for unused things, it's not working. So are we going to look at that?
Ian, can you answer that one, please?
Yes, I can. Anything we can ask for from a developer must be about mitigating their severe impact. I'll give that because we can't just go in with a shopping list of things we would like. It has to be compliant with the regulations. If one of the things we can ask for, because it's shown, is encouraging public transport for either new workers at a site or new householders, we can get those free travel passes for them. If then those householders decide not to use them, yes, we have to give them the money back, but we've not actually lost anything because we could only ask for it for that purpose anyway. So having the opportunity to do it, I think we would be very remiss if we hadn't at least given the opportunities. One of the big problems you have with new housing estates is, do you lay the transport on because the 5-year clock starts ticking the first house, the first 100, the first 1,000? There's a very fine point when you start trying to lay on because behaviour is usually formed in the first few months. We try. There is some take up, and as you say, a lot of it gets given back, but at least we've secured the opportunity for people to try.
Thank you very much. Councillor Poland, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a few questions on the DRT, just to improve my understanding, really, and for when I'm talking to residents, because this will come up in some of my villages. In terms of if the DRT, what would be the cost to residents compared to what is currently the case? Although I do fully accept that if it's older people, it means bus passes and therefore it's free in any event. The DRT, is it the idea that they take people to the nearest town or settlement that has an existing bus service, like you talked about in Broughton Astley, or would it be the case that you can call them up and they'll take you within reason anywhere? Is it that they will take you anywhere as long as it's on the traditional route? I'm just wondering how that works. Mr. Bolter talked about before about it couldn't be the same day, and I understand that that is the case. Is there any potential at all for it to be the same day? My main thinking there is fully accept that a lot of medical appointments are in advance, but if you wake up in the morning and you've got tonsillitis in a severe case, you don't necessarily want to have to wait a day, 2 days. If that would be a concern that I would have, certainly, if I was in that situation. And final question is potential a mix of the DRT and the traditional bus service an option? So in Loughborough, for instance, there's a market twice a week. So could you say we'll have a traditional bus service Thursday, Saturday, and maybe Monday or something, and then any other times you'd have the DRT? Could that potentially be an option?
I think we've got Jenna who's bursting to answer those questions. I see you jump to the microphone. So over to you, Jenna.
I was trying to get in before there was too many in one go, but I'll run through them. No, correct me if I miss any out. So the first question, I think I'm really glad you've asked, actually, because I think it's a common worry for people around the cost of DRT. If a taxi is turning up to your town centre or to your door, it must be very expensive. So the principle of demand responsive is still that it's an equivalent to a bus pass, a bus ticket. We will look at that locally and review that annually as part of that. As you say as well, that the bus passes would be valid to the same rules as a public transport service that would more traditional bus services. So people wouldn't notice a difference in terms of that. It shouldn't cost the user any more to use demand responsive transport than it would a bus service. Similarly, other things we've looked at before, if you are going to have a demand responsive service that connects to another service, if that was something that met need, then we would look at bundling that up and making sure that people didn't pay twice, and that it was proportionate to that. So I think it's a really good thing for people to be able to understand that one. Nearest town's interesting. We've had several debates in the office about what does your nearest local centre mean, what does it have to do in the past, and one of the things you'll notice here is we've looked at things like shopping, primary health care, employment and training. So we're looking at centres that have a good range of those things. We have got examples in the county already where we provide to 2 centres, one because actually the doctor's surgery is in a fairly small village, as it happens, without much else. So we do some days to doctor's surgeries, other days to shops, and we make sure that that provision is available across that range. And that's really about those priority needs that Ian talked through. So I think we'd be flexible. What we probably won't be able to do if we were to apply the policy as it's proposed at the moment is things like, I don't really like the co-op, I want to go to Sainsbury's, and that sort of thing, because that becomes very very personal choice. You've got neighbours against neighbours and that type of thing. So we look more about the level of provision and whether it's consistent in that sense. I think that probably covers in terms of destinations as well, in terms of there's no limit on linking up if that's the best thing to do. We find that some of our service users that use our very rural services, it is about getting somewhere, and one journey is the best thing to do, but that's not to say we wouldn't consider that. I should say that part of what we would be doing is really talking to the community that already uses the service if this policy were to be implemented, following it. So we wouldn't make all those decisions sitting in the office without talking to anybody. And I think the same day thing was a concern. I think I was with you on that consultation exercise we did 4 years ago, and it was the same concern there. I think what we find is that we would contract a level of service, and that would be available. Most operators would be willing to take things on the same day. In fact, when they get to know people, they do. What we tend to find, though, is that we need to put some rules in place to help establish a level of service so that the contract is good value, as Ian was talking about. And then that becomes something that actually runs itself. The operator and the service users will discuss that, and if something on the day can be arranged, it very often is. I think that was it.
Oh, thank you very much. And Councillor Bremner.
Thank you, Chair. Just one or two comments, and if you could respond. I was thinking about youth in terms of consultation, and I know that perhaps the elderly would respond quicker, perhaps online or around more during the day, and whether there's been enough communication to young people about these subsidised services and the consultation. We're just in half-term week, so there's not a lot of children around, and whether some of the perhaps more isolated communities are using these services currently, and whether they're actually aware of the consultation. That's one thing. Second thing, very quickly, on page 61, and I will go to my own division if you don't mind. I'm interested about the story around the DRT. I know at the beginning you said that the school trip is excluded from this, but is the DRT included within possible school journeys? That's one question. Because in and around Market Harbour, which is a growing sub-regional centre, we have two services, 33 and 44. And you could have a mix of services around those two provisions as they currently are, how it evolves. Perhaps there's one subsidised service supported by DRT. Because there's thought, particularly in Lubbenham, why the Foxton service doesn't actually also serve Lubbenham, because it's in very close proximity geographically in that area. So they're the two questions. And one little rider about young people. In my experience, under 16-year-olds want to travel to Leicester, and they have, what was it, 94% commercial services covering that around the county. And we're talking about a policy that's covering 6% that we actually have provision of. So best use of money for 6%, I think, overall, this consultation hits it on the head for the consultation within those vulnerable groups. That's just a comment to make. But I'd like to know about the DRT and school run in combination with a reduced subsidised service.
Right. Is that Jana or is it Ian?
You get the joy of both of us, I think.
Okay, well, that's very nice, thank you.
Question that's often come up as part of the consultation when we've been doing it. It's amazing the number of people who stand in front of you saying they didn't know anything about what you were about to talk to them about. What's quite interesting is, yes, we haven't written to every resident of Leicestershire explaining that we will be doing this. However, I think the best way we've consulted on this, on all of the bus routes that we currently support, we have put the consultation information for the bus operators to put out and encourage them to talk about it. So the users of the service are the ones we really wanted to reach out to. So those communities, so if you're using it or been on it, across this 12-week period, we have tried to reach out to you quite extensively. Then electronically through parish councils, town councils and various other ways. But the main route has been for those who are using it or those who might use it occasionally in that 12-week period. So consultation, I think we've covered as well as we can. The only other thing is we do work very closely with our equalities group, and we have done an awful lot of work with them on how we could get the messages out and how the policy should be formed. For the DRT bit, specialist knowledge, I'll leave to Jana. She's far more knowledgeable.
So just picking up on a couple of those questions around school transport and DRT, and then integration of services around there. I think, sorry to repeat myself a little bit, I think the issue that you've given the example of there of the 33 and the 44 in Market Harbour would be exactly the kind of thing that where we're given the go-ahead from Cabinet to look at this policy. We'd be out having those conversations with people that say, you've got this, why don't you bring this in here at this time? We only need it at 10 o'clock and bring the services together. So that is exactly the kind of thing that we would be looking for. I think with demand responsive transport on schools, it's an interesting one because we wouldn't pay, subsidise a service that provides a better service than the statutory duty that we provide under the home to school transport policy in some areas, because obviously that would create inequality. However, there'll be nothing to stop school children using a demand responsive service if it happened to be useful to them. You know, they could book a place and pay a fare if that was there. But I think we wouldn't design demand responsive transports around journeys that were either covered by or excluded by the home to school transport, because I think it would create confusion. But we wouldn't ban any particular group from using demand responsive transport. And again, in the past, we have found that that young people have used demand responsive transport in the past as well.
Thank you. I think we've covered that quite well. I know we're looking forward to the future report and the consultation. Over to Blake for another comment.
No, it's not a comment. It's just to wrap up from, you know, a lead member perspective. Can I thank the panel for all the comments, because we're in the consultation period. The report clearly identifies that the consultation will come to an end on the 13th of June. And I truly believe that the department have done as much as they can to try and get the widest audience possible and make them aware. And I'd like to thank the press and the media as well, because they've done numerous stories, often taken up many pages of their paper on this particular piece of work. And I think that will be to our benefit when it comes to implementing a policy and making sure that we get the correct policy. The final point I'd like to make is it's imperative that we do bring in a policy. In essence, we don't really have a policy with transparent criteria that, you know, we can all observe and see and understand why we're supporting what routes, etc. And hopefully the proposals that we're publicising through the consultation will put that in place. We've talked about a number of numbers, and what was interesting is Ian saying we spend 2.4 million, 2.314 million currently. And when you consider that we're seeking to make an efficiency of around £400,000 on that total budget, and it is an efficiency. Yes, there might be services that are affected, but I think we can find ways through the proposals that we're bringing forward to make sure that we have a service that best supports those areas that most need a service. I think that's a modest efficiency to make, given the size of the budget that we'll continue to spend going forward. So I welcome the comments that have been made through this panel, and I very much look forward to seeing the responses to the whole consultation as and when they come in.
Well, as a lead member in the Cabinet for that, we appreciate the comments, and I'm sure on behalf of everybody around this table, we look forward to the end of the consultation, further discussions. It is an emotive, challenging time, but I think we've got a great group of people around here that can do the job that we need to move forward. Thank you. So now we go on to the next agenda item, 11, and it's the performance report quarter. Unfortunately, I think it's over to Ian again. I hope your voice is lasting. Best of luck, and over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. This feels like bringing one of my old school reports home. Hopefully it won't have C3 minus, must try harder.
Can I say, Ian, I used to hide mine.
Oh, right. So I will quickly take through some of the highlights. I won't dwell too on what we're doing as I used to in my old reports, and the ones that are in the green are all doing very well. I will go immediately to the areas that maybe not performing so well and start talking about those. But I would ask the committee note and ask any questions at the end, if that's okay. Yes, I've probably got about 5 minutes of my voice left, so I'll go quickly for you. As you know, we have 19 indicators, and only 12 of those have been updated this quarter. That's mainly due to the fact that they can be reported at different times and various frequencies. Moving into those not doing so well, all 3 of the waste management indicators have been updated, and 2 of those indicators have changed status, unfortunately, and gone from this quarter from the amber into the red. The reason for that is the first one, we've gone from a municipal waste sent to landfill is now off track. It's from its interim target of 30%. It's gone from 30.6 in quarter 3 to 32.3 in quarter 4. This has largely been wholly due to the increase as a result of loss of alternative landfill disposal points, which is outside, unfortunately, this authority's control. However, the County Council is in the process of negotiating an increase in the amount of waste delivered to alternative disposal points, and we will bring future updates back to this committee on how we're progressing with that. The next is the percentage of waste sent by local authorities across Leicestershire to reuse, recycling or composting has declined from 47.4 to 48.3 from Q3 to Q4. And again, this is a loss of the alternative non-landfill disposal points from which a proportion of recyclable materials have been recovered. There is greater uncertainty about how the future of this performance will be going in the future, and we are conducting a number of investigations which will come back as a future report to this committee on what action we intend to take about that. Moving on, we're then moving into the one of the often discussed, the percentage of waste recycled from LCC sites continues to decline in performance from 54% down from 55%. We've been doing a number of investigations that we often get quizzed on this, and it mainly relates to the fact of those outlying offices that produce around a ton of waste. And we are coming to the conclusion that a lot of our waste disposal points are actually being accessed by non-LCC people to dump waste in them at the moment. So we are considering what to do about that and our performance, and that will form part of our new environmental strategy, which will be coming to this committee shortly. Under the Making Roads Safer, as you can see, it's always a sad picture whenever there are any fatalities or serious accidents on Leicestershire roads. We continue to still perform well, but we do not rest on our laurels. And in fact, members may be aware, and if you're not, please do be aware, average speed cameras at 7 sites across Leicestershire are now being put up as we speak. So speeding will become one of those issues you could be reminded about more frequently in the future. I know we discussed that some at a previous meeting. And we will continue to bring our annual report to this committee to discuss in full road safety. The final one I would like to mention is our continued good standing of level of highway maintenance. However, as many members and members of the public and the BBC every morning when I hear those stories about potholes, this has been a very long, hard winter, and it has exposed across the country, not only in Leicestershire, how vulnerable to the weather our road network can be. I'm very pleased to say that at a recent Cabinet meeting, £5 million worth of extra funding has been granted to the department, £3 million to spend this year, £2 million next year, and we will bring in a report to the next meeting in June, at the end of June, on how that money will be spent. However, the member might wish to say a little bit more about that, as he's been very good in securing us that extra funding. There was nothing further I wish to say. If there are any questions or queries, happy to take them, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Just to say that recently I drove over a few borders outside of Leicestershire, and I must say we're miles ahead of some of them. It's absolutely, we are doing a good job there, because I drive a lot around the country, and we are ahead. I couldn't believe some of the conditions in Staffordshire. It was awful. So I get phone calls, but we get them repaired quite quickly where I live. But also, it's nice to travel around and think we're doing a lot better than other people. So that was quite good. I'll go straight to. Do you want to add anything now? Would you like to wait till the end?
I'll wait to the end, Chairman.
Okay, I'll go straight to Mr. Ball, because I can see peripheral vision. That's training. Would like to get on there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, interesting report. The environment strategy, when is it going to come to us? Is it the next meeting, or...?
Yeah, the environment strategy should be coming to the next scrutiny meeting, I believe.
In June?
Yes, end of June. So
right, thank you. Look forward to seeing that.
Can I just, Bill, Mr. Bolter, just to fair, Nigel, you're quite standing in for for Joe. So it was nice to meet you this morning, and it's quite new to you, this I gather, isn't that so? Yeah, so welcome. You've got a great name, Shilton, a great goalkeeper. I hope you're related. Anyway, carry on, okay?
thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a bit concerned about some of the figures going down. Now, I understand that some of the facilities we were taking things to, we can't take to anymore because they're no longer in existence. Is that correct? Okay. Now, members of this committee may remember we put a great deal of money into a facility at Coventry, not so long back, so we could increase our recycling taken there. We may or may not approve of the end use of that, but that's another question. So when's that coming on stream?
We already use the facility to a certain extent.
Yes.
and that has been maintained and increased gradually over the period, in line with what information we're expecting. The profile is governed by what's in the MTFS, and that's expecting a further increase, stepped increase in capacity in 2020.
So when do we get our full money's worth out of that facility? We put money in, quite a lot of money into it. When do we get the full value for our money we're putting in? Because it's costing us taking stuff to landfill at the minute.
We're operated in line with the disposal policy at the moment, and I don't believe it's a factor of the money that we put into the facility, because I don't believe there was but it's something we can cover off outside if you wanted further detail.
Okay, Nigel, that's okay. I'll go over to, I think the lead member may have be a bit more briefed on this, so we'll hand over to Blake, okay?
Well, if I am, I'm being briefed by Nigel and the team. So I think
Well, you look
his
very eager
reluctance,
there.
his
I've got to say, you look
reluctance
very
to
eager.
speak to some of the details is because we've entered into a commercial agreement, and obviously there are commercial sensitivities around that which would need to be dealt with in a very different way. Just to point out, I know a lot of the team that are before you today you may not have seen before, but I can say I see them on a regular basis. And you'll remember when the previous assistant director, Holly, moved on, we had an interim period where Nigel, Vicky and the rest of the team in the waste department, before we appointed a new assistant director, did a brilliant job, and I can assure you we've got some really good quality and depth in this department. You can see it, we've got an assistant director and assistants in the highways team, and each and every one of them do a brilliant job for us, and they are as well briefed as anybody else in the organisation, so you can have full confidence in what they're telling you. In terms of the particular waste issue, I think we get good value at the moment. What you've got to remember, yes, waste will go to landfill. It has gone to landfill. It will continue to go to landfill. We have an objective to send zero waste to landfill, but in reality, given the increase in waste generally as the economy increases, because of the commercial issues affecting certain plant and systems that we use, we need a toolbox of options, and Coventry represents a small piece of our toolbox. There are other options, and what we've actually done with Coventry, which I don't think is breaching any of the commercial sensitivities, is allowed ourselves to save potentially millions, many tens of millions of pounds in the next 15, 20 years by the arrangement we're about to enter into through mitigation of cost of landfill. So whilst we're exploiting the capacity that's already been made available to us at Coventry, what we've done is extended that capacity. I'd have to pass back on to the officers to explain to you when we intend to direct much more waste and whether those commercial arrangements have been fully secured. But certainly there is a cabinet decision to enter into those arrangements.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Nigel, do you want to keep the flow going?
Well, it's just to add that it is from 2020 when we're expecting a stepped increase in usage, which would make a significant difference to the level of performance.
Okay, so that's that bit. So at the minute, we've put money into a facility, which we're not getting full value out of yet, but we will in 18 months' time. And we're putting stuff into landfill, which is costing us money. So there's a double effect there. Okay.
Chairman, can I just point to
Yeah,
clarity?
2 secs, yeah. Over to you.
I don't
Councillor.
think that's the case at all. I think we're getting excellent value from all of our solutions at the moment in terms of dealing with our waste, but the limited capacity within the market, it's a very complex area. This notion that somehow we've put money already into increasing our capacity at one of those solutions, i.e. Coventry, I don't think that's correct at all.
Can I ask then a question, Chair? Sorry, this is interesting. I understand commercial sensitivity, and when can the figures be made available? When do members, is the commercial sensitivity only with the Cabinet, or is it with other members can obtain the information?
I think it would be a matter for the Constitution, but in this instance, I think there are precedents within the county in all sorts of areas of business, whether it be assets, infrastructure, property, etc., where when we're dealing with commercial organisations, there are certain constitutional principles that we adhere to. I'm not at liberty to explain the minutiae of the Constitution, but I'm sure someone else can.
It's just a question because these come up on a regular basis. Over to you, Ian.
If I can make the suggestion, Chair, if Councillor Bolter would like to continue his questions, I think as we've got the environment strategy coming to the end of June meeting anyway, and I know those commercial discussions are ongoing at this time, if you log the questions with us, we can look at see if as part of the update on the environment strategy that we bring back, that those questions can be answered back here, and it's only a month away, and you can get the responses then.
Councillor Bolter, are you happy with that?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm a patient man, Chairman. So I'm very kind with Nigel, because it's his first time at committee, so I'm being very gentle with him. The bit about the LAC sites and satellite sites and their waste being somewhat higher than what we expected, Ian's answered that, is that perhaps somebody's using that facility for their own uses rather than ours. However, it would be nice if we could have a league table of departments, not just outlying sites, but internally, of which departments produce the most waste and which ones recycle the most. I'm sure that won't be too much of a breakdown to achieve. And then we could have a little competition between departments who's best at recycling. I'll leave you to think about that one for a minute.
Ian, over to Ian.
Obviously, as we produce a lot of tarmac and heavy waste, I'm sure our colleagues are sitting over there in corporate resources who produce more warmer air, which is obviously lighter, may find that they could beat us hands down every time. I don't think you'd be comparing like for like, so that wouldn't really... I think we'd want to just monitor our own performance and how we were doing ourselves. Like for like wouldn't be really fair.
It's nice to have a bit of humour, isn't it? That was lovely. Thank you. Over to Blake.
Chairman, just on that point, on the satellite sites, I think the Assistant Director's already told us it equates to about a tonne's worth of material. In the grand scheme of things, it's minuscule, the amount. I've argued for many years now. For some strange reason, we haven't managed to get it changed, probably constitutional. But we do probably need to look at this metric, because does it serve any purpose?
Yeah, fair point.
Yes.
Councillor Bolter, over to you again.
May I carry on then, Chair? It was our previous practice, well, when the recycling sites were run by a private company, they used to recycle quite a bit of the product that people took in there, put to one side, and they sold on to members of the public or other organisations, or given some to charity organisations to refurbish. Since we took the sites over, that seems to have stopped. It all goes in the skip and gets crushed if it's wooden stuff. That to me means a loss of resource of income to the county council, and also a waste of natural resources. So I think that's something that we ought to look at and bring back, because we should be using reuse rather than crush.
Well, we talked about briefing. I know that Ian had something to say about that, because if I'm right, we are looking at that, and there's a potential to gain some considerable income in the future if we do it right. Is that correct, Ian?
Yes, that is correct, and Nigel will come in with, it's one of those little exciting projects. As we've now brought the household recycling sites back into authority control, one, we've been able to save an awful lot of money, which is good, but we've also then, as you rightly said, we've taken them back to their base provision again, because as any commercial activity that's been running for a while, there may have been some practices that we needed to make sure were safe and operating correctly to start with, because we are now responsible. We are then, now we've got those on a firm and level footing, making the big savings we have, which is really good. Now looking at exactly the opportunities you said about those things that are coming in there, and how we can work with providers to generate more income from those salvageable goods. Good suggestion.
And I think one of the last ones, Chair.
That's all right, Councillor Bolter, fire away.
Sorry. If you,
sorry, over to Nigel.
I was just wanting to clarify about the reuse since the thing. I can understand why it might appear that way. I think we've made a concerted effort for, staff to make more of, tidying items away and things, so items aren't visible around the site. But I can reassure you that reuse levels are in 17-18 were 15% greater than they were in 16-17. So we've actually managed a small increase of about 15% since we've brought those sites in sight in terms of the volumes we actually reuse.
Excellent, thank you. Next question, Councillor Bolter.
Well, it's just really been a tongue-in-cheek one here. Do you think the waste has increased since we cut back the opening times of the tips in inverted commas because people don't know what day of the week they're open. And we've cut back in advertising about recycling. The budget was cut back for recycling a few years back now, and we said at the time that might have an impact on people who are recycling goods.
Any question there?
We'll bring that as part of the update for the environmental strategy.
Would you do that? That'd be fabulous. Okay, excellent.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Bill, over to you.
Could I just ask about item 22? This relates, although it doesn't say so, to air quality, I take it. If we look at the chart, it rather indicates that we're going up from 1,800 kilotons of CO2. Not sure how you measure that anyway, to over 2,000. We're obviously moving in the wrong direction there, and this appears to be linked to, according to the report, to traffic congestion. That's how I'm interpreting this. I mean, what we can actually see in all the urban areas is that congestion is getting worse. And it seems to be showing up in these figures in terms of deteriorating air quality. If I'm right so far, I'll follow up if that's how I read.
Is that right, Ian? It would be, I think.
Okay, essentially what you're reading there is more people are travelling more in their cars. Yes, that's what's happening. We are a country that's growing. The definition of what's congestion and not, in the amount you're delayed, depends very much on where you live and the current congestion you experience. I know some people who think waiting 15 seconds to get out of a junction is horrendous. I know some of us who sit on the M1 going home through roadworks thinks an hour is, okay, not a bad journey tonight. It's all about perspective. However, in our normal reports that we do bring, the amount of traffic has, since the upturn in the economy, been going up, increasing quite considerably. And as you know, Leicestershire, like everywhere else in the country, is delivering more houses to meet that growth. So we are expecting more traffic on the roads. I think what's quite interesting is the evolution in car technology is actually making those vehicles a lot greener, and it's how you're then dealing with that. The only other thing I would say on there, and obviously as we are a two-tier authority, the statutory duty for considering air quality sits with our district colleagues. We do work with them about mitigating congestion, and every study we do, and we are working with our public health colleagues as well, looking at air quality. We are looking at the air quality impacts of those schemes that we do to help relieve congestion. However, looking at air quality as part of new developments is the duty of the planning authorities, which in this case is the districts.
Over to you, back to you.
So obviously the districts are told to build houses at 450 houses a year, and they have no choice, because if they do not, then the planning inspector will impose it anyway. So I'm not so sure you can actually say to the districts you should stop building houses because air quality is deteriorating. I mean, if you could, that's fine, but I wouldn't have thought that would be received too well. I understand what I'm getting at this. I understand, because I read in today's Mercury, which is the font of all information and knowledge, and you can believe every word of it, that a report is coming out now about traffic management, and that is going to that's going to be the answer to where we're going with this. Could I ask, could we have more information about this report that went to the Mercury today? Is there in fact a report, a consultant's report, which is going to give us the answer to this conundrum? And if so, can we please see it, either privately or can it come to this committee? It is important. It's the air that we breathe, and I think it's important to all of us.
I think you got a fair point. Over to the cabinet lead on this. I think he put his hand up straight away. So
yes, I'll just give you some background about that report that supposedly went to the Mercury. There was no report that went to the Mercury. I was contacted by a Mercury journalist yesterday, or it might have been the day before. And they were doing their job. They were looking at our forward plan, as every member is entitled to do so. It gets circulated, and on the forward plan it says there's a report coming to Cabinet about managing traffic in our communities. And I'll tell you what I told the journalist is that we have an ambition, an objective as an authority. We want to manage traffic in our communities much, much better. We do it pretty well, but I think we've all identified areas and approaches we can take to do it even better than what we do, and we intend to use those approaches. So it's an interesting report, which will come to Cabinet. Members, we've already debated this a number of times for 2 or 3 years. There's been a ledger within the MTFS, and we've discussed this at budget time, that says we will review options in relation to county-wide parking, options in relation to permit schemes, and other areas like that. The report that will come to Cabinet will square off that particular area. We've identified in the consultancy work that I spoke about, as all members would appreciate and was aware of, some consultants were looking at a very high level, strategic level, what would need to do to bring in a scheme. I've always said that we'd review it and would weigh up the options based on the information that was fed back to us. We're now going to bring forward a report that says, whilst a county-wide parking strategy might have some merit, because the one thing we've just spoken about is an increase in traffic, especially on our artery roads going into our town centres, etc. That still is a problem, which we need to, manage better. Hence, managing traffic in our communities. But one of the decisions we're going to take is to not pursue a strict parking charging regime as one of the tools in dealing with that. So essentially, the report that will come to Cabinet will tell us this, and in terms of the work that lays behind that process, we're all aware it's being done, and that report will include some information about that work.
Thank you, Blake. Can I just add? Thank you.
So just to confirm, it's nothing to do with air quality, which I know you have a particular interest in, Councillor Bill. Management of traffic in Leicestershire, as in most authorities, is either done under the local transport plan or devolved down through to our network management plan. And our network management plan, which was brought in 2014, will also be going through a refresh to look at how we're managing traffic. But anything on that which went through full Cabinet last time would come back through this committee and go to Cabinet.
I'm confused actually, because if air quality, which is being discussed here, is associated with increasing traffic, and there is a traffic management report around, or more than one report, could information on this please come to this committee, because we would like to know what can possibly be done to reverse this trend of a deteriorating.
I think it will. I think, Councillor, I think you're right, and I'd like it to come here as well, and I think it will. I mean, what I'm hearing is it will come back through this committee. I think also we have to put into perspective that it was only so many years ago that we got tax relief on diesel cars. Subsequently, now they're trying to change that, and throughout the world they're trying to change it because there was some information or science that wasn't correct. And now there's potentially future there'll be additional taxes on diesel, and now petrol cars actually are greener. So unfortunately, I drive a diesel car. I was told that's what you do because it's environmentally good, and it isn't. And the blockages we're getting in Melton, I can assure you, I understand what dirty air feels like, and having lived in a city where schools and kids' intelligence is affected by this awful dirty air, I know we've got a responsibility, and I totally support you, Councillor Bill, on this, because I think it is our responsibility, and I know, talking to Ian and the Cabinet, that they're very keen, and it will come through this committee. Thank you very much. Of course, Councillor Bill.
As Mr. Payne's already said, that the Mercury is a well-respected publication, and everything's in there, I believe, of course. There was reports a little while ago regarding a certain recycling facility which we are directed to use, and a certain concern from residents nearby about increasing smell from the facility. If that was to be true, and flies, I believe. And if that was to be true, have we got an alternative to use, or what? Have we got a plan B lined up in case we have to do something?
Chair, if it's okay, that's obviously an additional question. If it's okay, we'll reply directly back to Councillor
It is additional.
Bolton.
Can we just report next time? And
Absolutely.
you're all right with that, Councillor, but we'll find out.
Okay.